I'm going live about now. We are on a non-stop streak of continuous streams. We are working up to hopefully the announcement of the iPhone SE 4 or what might be called the iPhone 16e, depending on how Apple is going to play their cards here tomorrow. However, I honestly did not expect that anything interesting and worthwhile covering would be coming up today, but it has. And in fact, it has been something very interesting and something that I have worked to cover on this channel in the past, and that is the big AMD SoC Strix Halo finally being reviewed, finally being compared to Apple's M4 family. We'll get later on to the family aspect because the way some reviewers are handling it does not vibe too well with me, unfortunately, but it is still very, very interesting data nonetheless. And continuing his streak of getting back to being a full-on Apple leaker, we have more stuff from John Prosser covering the iPhone Air. Now, it is interesting. I have thus far always called it the iPhone 17 Air. That is meaningless. Like, it could be 17 Air, it could just be iPhone Air. The reason why I call it 17 Air is because if Apple is going to call the iPhone 17 Pro the 17 Pro rather than the iPhone Pro, then I don't see how they're going to take the number away from the Air, especially since the base model is just very likely going to be the iPhone 17, and they will have similar main cameras, they will have similar processors. So while I know iPhone Air sounds very clean, it sounds very comparable to iPad Air, MacBook Air, right? Apple does not add numbers to those product families. My speculation is more that it's going to be the iPhone 17 Air. If not, that's still fine. I think that's not a bad prediction on my part to make. Neither is it a bad prediction on the part of YouTubers like John Prosser. So we have plenty to talk about today, plenty to watch and review and react to. As always, before we get fully started, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, share it out, and yeah, do all the YouTube jazz beyond that. If you want to support us here directly, leave a donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. Consider becoming a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who all Martech Pro Max supporters right here. And you can also become a supporter on Patreon. And I am working, as I promised in a previous stream, on opening up the Discord, or opening up a Discord for all of us. Don't know how necessary it will honestly be. Let's see how many people will get to join the community as we hit tomorrow's iPhone SE announcement, as potentially Apple finally, hopefully releases iOS 18.4 beta. We did cover like the potential delay of some of those features, so that will be interesting to observe, like how exactly all of this plays out. But you guys know the drill by now. No need to dwell any longer on this. Without further ado, let's get to the full screen and let's get started. We're starting first with the iPhone 17 Air or iPhone Air design leak. I think that's just visually a good stepping stone into the video. I think honestly we did already cover the 17 Pro design leaks from Front Page Tech, so to me it just makes sense to react to the iPhone Air as he will present it now. He will also have something to say about the base iPhone 17 model, so that basically leaves us now with a visual impression of the entire iPhone 17 family: 17, 17 Air, 17 Pro, and Pro Max. And then for the future years, we'll have to see if Apple makes a foldable or a rollable, whether it's more of an iPhone iPad hybrid or an iPad Mac hybrid. There will be some interesting stuff in the future, but yeah, not that we are already covered for this year, but I do believe that we have somewhat of a comprehensive image at this point about the iPhone 17 family, which actually does line up with my previous predictions. Like, I've always said that it's February or like March where you get like really the first concrete leaks. You might have stuff that had been already covered before, but the final commitment to it, especially by larger leakers, that happens usually this time of year. So I'm very glad to be seeing that. So let's get started with what exactly John Prosser has to say about the iPhone 17 Air.
This is the all-new iPhone Air.
Yeah, let me see that body rock. Yeah, let me see that body move. Yeah, let me see that body rock.
At least that's what we thought it was going to look like when we were guessing the design. But what?
Really joining the chat. So you guys see he did here exactly what he did the last time. He basically showed the design that was largely predicted. So basically we are taking like the iPhone 16 dual camera design and replacing one of the cameras with the LED flash, because the iPhone Air has been rumored from its inception and its rumors to be a single camera solution. Yeah, again, this design was always based on pretty much nothing. It was pretty much always based on the idea that it's a thin iPhone with only one camera. So let us fit it somewhat well into the design paradigm of the iPhone 16. That being said, let's see what you'll have to say about the actual iPhone Air design.
At least that's what we thought it was going to look like when we were guessing the design. But what if we were not guessing anymore? Rumors of a very, very thin, slim new iPhone started over 6 months ago, with many analysts and publications making things a little fuzzy. You see, back then, the information, that's the name of the publication that leaked the stuff. I'm not just saying the word okay, anyway. The information and Kuoming Chi told us that Apple was hard at work on an ultra-slim iPhone model for 2025. If you are not playing along at home, that is this year. Kuo also told us that Apple would be killing off the Plus.
So the Plus has sold actually not too badly in comparison to the Mini, but it still is underselling the regular iPhone, the Pros. At this point, I understand why Apple is willing to exit, and there are actually going to be rumors, partially in this video and partially something that we'll cover online, well, on the website. We are always online, of course, when we are here, that in my opinion will make the regular iPhone 17 super attractive to a lot of people, specifically if you're somebody who really liked the design of the iPhone 16 family, or like specifically the 16 and 16 Plus with that dual camera arrangement. So Apple's idea probably is like, you know what, the Plus, it's not selling too well. If we at some point are going to give the base model, which by the way, I'm not sure if that's happening for the 17, like if we're going to give it the 6.3-inch displays that are now on the base Pro, that basically entirely kills our Plus market, right? Anybody who is willing to pay already close to $1,000, we are way better off upselling those people on the Pro models. But if we know some people want a smaller, lighter model, right? Even just from the use of aluminum rather than titanium or previously stainless steel, plus whatever money they can save, even by cutting off like half an inch of display size, we are way better off just mass producing the regular model and then make something more fun, something more niche in replacement to the Plus or the Mini. In my opinion, I'm not sure if the Air is going to hit that mark. In my opinion, if anything was going to make the Plus really successful, was a price drop, like to have a properly large differentiation between it and the Pro Max, and not even just between it and the Pro Max, but even between it and the Pro, right? Sure, it has a larger screen than the Pro, but the Pro got a slight screen size increase from 6.1 to 6.3 inches. It also has the better screen, right, with technology like ProMotion. So that advantage, even like battery life, sure, the 16 Plus has fantastic battery life, but you are giving up features, and people are like, you know what? Even if I get like the base Pro model, yeah, sure, I might get a little bit less battery life, somewhat smaller screen, but I get the better cameras, even more performance, the premium build, all those nice things. And hey, if I really want to go out, I'll just get the Pro Max that has an even larger screen than the Plus and all the niceties of the Pro. So yeah, I just don't see how the Plus would have succeeded unless Apple made it cheaper. Honestly, if the regular iPhone was $700 and the Plus was $800, I think that could have worked really, really well, but that would have cut into Apple's margins. I think even if they started both models at 256 gigabytes to give it slightly better value, that probably wouldn't have changed too much. But yeah, I understand why Apple is making the Air. I'm not happy with how the Air is turning out to be. Like targeting like a thickness between 5 and 6 millimeters, and then having to have this thick camera bar on top so the camera doesn't look ridiculous in comparison to the rest of the body. It's it's all a tiny bit questionable to me. I understand again why they're doing it. I understand it way more than Samsung doing like the Galaxy S25 Edge, which isn't even that thin, is completely like stupidly compromised in a way because you already have something like the Plus. So yeah, I'm just very confused by that product. With the iPhone, at least there's also a historic precedent for Apple focusing a lot on thinness and lightness. I mean, there's a reason why the Air moniker, the Air branding exists at all in Apple's family. But yeah, that is kind of my nuanced take on even the existence of the iPhone 17 Air, how it compares and contrasts to if Apple potentially kept the Plus model around. So let's see how John Prosser sees it all.
Model. Huh, weird. Very convenient timing. Naturally, as nerds and Apple fans just like you, we were all about this. It sounded great. We made a whole video about it. The difference, though, is that we actually disagreed a bit with things that were being said.
As did I. When the original rumors came out, the pricing was a stupid part of those rumors.
Literally, the iPhone 17 Slim, rumors suggested an ultra-thin and ultra-premium iPhone, with a starting price at around $1,300, which would make it more expensive than the Pro models.
And why we have speculated that this might not be the iPhone Air or an iPhone Slim, that it might instead be like a precursor to an iPhone Flip or Fold, which would, of course, much more explain the pricing.
It would make it the most expensive iPhone ever. But you see, those initial leaks came with this funny spec sheet. Things like a single camera on the back and an A19 chip inside. Yeah, like a regular one, a regular chip, not a Pro chip.
8 gigs of RAM rather than the rumored 12 gigs of RAM for the higher end models.
What is supposedly a $1,300 phone.
And I believe an Apple modem, while the Pro models are still sticking with Qualcomm this year.
All of that in the same time frame as nuking the Plus model? Yeah. No. We speculated that because of the sources reporting on this story, it must be real, but doubted that all of it was real.
Honestly, I think what Apple is trying to target here is they will make it a lot thinner, right? But it's still like on the X and Y axis, it's taller and wider than the regular iPhone 17. It might use like more forward-looking technologies, like a more dense battery, being a stacked battery or a silicon carbide battery, right? Whatever other tech Apple might use simple, thicker graphene and aluminum sheets for the heat dissipation of the A19 in the iPhone 17 model. And they might introduce a super thin, super advanced vapor chamber heatsink for the iPhone 17 Air, right? So they might be experimenting here with technologies that either will come right away to the 17 Pro or might potentially have to wait a year before they hit mass production enough to even be ready for the Pros, like let's say the 18 Pro family. And experimenting with technology that can make it a lot thinner will also be very advantageous for the eventual foldables that Apple are rumored to make. Again, whether we are talking iPhone iPad hybrids or iPad Mac hybrids, making stuff thin so that the foldable device is not too thick when actually folded up is kind of important. So yeah, this is why $1,300 for this as an end product never made sense, but $1,300 for the products that might at some point be the result of the technologies that Apple develops here, that to me is actually reasonable. Nerd World, hello, welcome to the stream again.
I decided, or more so speculated, that one piece of this puzzle must not be accurate. And that one piece is probably the price.
Really, there will be last and new battery tech? It depends. Like, the question is, do we need new battery tech as long as what Apple is delivering is good battery life? Don't forget, there was a time when Apple had like 1800 milliampere hour batteries, while the rest of the industry was targeting 3000, right? Sure, silicon carbon batteries will be nice at some point, and I do expect, like, for example, the 17 Pro Max to hit close to 5000 milliampere hours, but do they really need more if they still nicely compete with 4700 milliampere hours versus devices with 6000? We'll also get later to products that are going so overkill on something like cameras that they actually once again compromise on battery size. Mainly I'm talking about the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. But for a thinner phone, I'm actually not sure. We have not heard what Apple would utilize to give the iPhone Air a nice battery size. Plus, I could see that Apple's target for the iPhone Air might be to have very similar end results as the base iPhone, right? So you would have maybe a slightly larger battery, right? Maybe around 3800 milliampere hours or something like that. That's enough to compensate for the larger screen, given that a lot of the power draw comes from the chip, especially if Apple's modem is truly more efficient, because thus far we have gotten rumors that the Air is getting Apple's new modem, not the regular 17. Let's say it uses some form of denser battery to achieve that. Or whatever it does, it's still like nicely cooled, again, vapor chambered rather than simple graphene aluminum sheets. So I think that what Apple could be targeting is that the end result with the 17 model, the base model, is the same. Real world battery life is about the same. Real world sustained performance is roughly the same, right? It's thinner, but it's wider and taller. And it might have one fewer camera, but again, you do get the larger screen in return. Maybe something else, who knows? I really hope that the rumor about mono speakers is false, because I think that Apple makes fantastic stereo speakers in smartphones. Giving that up would be absolutely insane to me. And at that point, I would be saying, yeah, Apple has compromised enough that you should really get either the base model or the Pro and Pro Max. But if you're just somebody who wants something slightly larger but doesn't actually want to deal with the size and weight you usually associate with that, it could be a niche product for like 5 to 10% of the Apple audience. Samsung skipped it in the S25U, and the other Android manufacturers are not good with battery life. Yeah, that's the point. I'm not saying, by the way, that of course, if you give Apple the same battery tech that you give like an Vivo X200 Pro, right, a 6100 milliampere hour battery or something like that. Yeah, of course, that is gonna win on the iPhone rather than a 4600. Let's even say it's just a 5500, because Apple still has a lot of other tech inside their phones that other companies, especially Chinese companies, do not care as much about. Usually, like the trifecta of speakers, haptics, and microphones. That's what I always bring up, where Apple might compete with a company like Samsung, and sometimes Google, but usually Chinese companies, they don't care as much about those three things. But yeah, if Apple even had 5500 milliampere hours versus an Android device's 6100, so a solid 10% difference, the iPhone would probably end up with like 20% longer battery life, real life.
If you take away that super high, ridiculous price tag, what you're left with is something that looks a lot less like a crazy ultra premium iPhone, and something that looks more so like a replacement for a Plus model that's being taken away. Letting Apple experiment and try something new after their attempts on a mini iPhone that didn't do well.
I love this color. Damn, that was such a beautiful iPhone. Just to think about how good it would look if you unified these cameras the way that they are on the 16 lineup. Oh, that would look so freaking clean. This is the phone I got for my niece back then, and I actually used it for 2 weeks before gifting it to her for her birthday. Yeah, I love this 12 mini.
And now, with
or is that the 13 mini? I always forget which one had the nicer blue.
Plus, and how
I think
would
that's a
Apple,
12 mini.
the kings of lackluster technology backed by impeccable
Yeah, sure, whatever, John. Whatever helps you sleep at night.
marketing, decide to market such a product? Well, they'd probably lean on a naming they've already been using that has massive equity among
and a branding that is very much associated with a mid-range product. iPad Airs, MacBook Airs, they're very much associated with a product that is cheaper than the iPhone Pros, than the Pro models in their respective lineup. So, this idea that Apple could ever market an Air or even a Slim as something way more expensive. It has happened in the past when the MacBook Air was introduced. It was actually more expensive than the base MacBook Pro, but that primarily came from the usage of different storage. So the MacBook Air back in the day was entirely pushing solid state drive, flash storage. The base MacBook Pros at that point still were using hard drives, so that kind of defined the price difference. Given that the Pros are still going to have superior specs in every way, better camera, more cameras, thicker, heavier, with a bigger battery, probably even better, brighter screen, whatever. Even though, of course, this year we are finally getting LTPO across the entire lineup. It just doesn't make sense for it to ever be more expensive than the Pro.
Their product line and slap that on it. The branding of Air. I was so sure of the leaked price tag being wrong that I said some things. If this phone launches and it has these mid-range, mid-level specs that have leaked, if that phone comes out,
Tipo Master, Intel going crazy today. Any things on word coming out TSMC may manage an Intel fab for 20% stake? Could Apple use 18A for anything? Smaller subchips to make Orange Man happy? It's actually hard to say because this is something that has been rumored for a little while. I'm not sure how much of it is going to be taken really seriously. I mean, logically, like TSMC, like my question is like, what the fuck is even a 20% stake at that point? Like, is it just for the new node? Like, how much would they have to buy up of all those new fabs to make that happen? Would it just be the newest fab, or would TSMC also handle like Intel 4, Intel 7 at this point? Like, these are such weird things. And yeah, the question is, could like for us in the community here, like the most interesting thing here is, could Apple realistically use Intel 18A for anything once it's like managed by TSMC? By the way, managed by TSMC, 20% stakes, all of those things are very interesting when you're talking about super direct competitors, right? Intel's 18A and 20A are GAAFET technologies, just as TSMC's upcoming 2 nanometer node. 18A is planning to adopt backplane power delivery, something that TSMC has delayed originally from 2 nanometer, then to N2P, and finally to A16. Granted, there is a chance that N2P and A16 might launch at the same time, and one will just be the more expensive version of the other. But like the fact that TSMC would now have access to Intel fabs and potentially use that to solve any of their own issues, or vice versa. If TSMC comes around, they have an only 20% stake, but they fix whatever is going wrong at Intel, and Intel's engineers are like, oh, you know what? Thanks TSMC, and whatever revenue they make up with that, they then use it to buy up that 20% stake down the road. It's really weird. But yeah, I mean, Apple could use a TSMC controlled Intel 18A maybe in a year or so. Definitely not this year. It would require a lot of validating and internal testing. What exactly they would use it for, I'm not sure. I mean, it could be even like an H4 chip if they really wanted to, or they create like a port of the A18 chip if it's ever necessary. I just remember last time when Tim Apple tricked him by showing him an already existing old factory. Yeah, that was when they were manufacturing Mac Pros there. Now, to be honest, they did manufacture the 2019 Mac Pro in the United States, didn't they, originally? Let me actually look that up. 2019 Mac Pro made in USA. Or was it really just that he used that? Um, Apple has previously made a big deal out of how the 2019 Mac Pro was made in Austin, Texas, although not all of them. Ah, yeah, exactly. That was kind of the controversy. This has chiefly meant that the Mac Pro being assembled there, the new model continues to have a label saying final assembly in the USA. Yeah, so Orange Man tricking is not that difficult. I'm thinking about chips like display controllers and modems. The problem is 18A is way too expensive actually for those technologies. Like, if Apple were to use like an Intel node for some of those things, it would more likely be something like Intel 3 rather than Intel 18A. Because there's also like an opportunity cost, right? For Apple, it's expensive to buy Intel 18A, but for Intel, it makes way more sense to sell somebody 18A who can actually make a high profit off it, and that usually means like a main processor, or in this day and age, it also can mean like the packaging technology, right, or something like that. So like a bridge, like a semiconductor bridge, basically. So I'm not sure if any of that could help. Yeah, I know. The Mac Pro, the trash can Mac Pro, that one was definitely final assembly in the United States. All of that is pretty meaningless given how much of the components are actually made in China still and fabbed in China or Taiwan, and even how some parts just come from Europe and whatever. Like final assembly is such a small part in today's world. So much of it is highly automated. Like I find it always funny when politicians try to hyper focus on that. But let's continue first with this.
And it is $1,300. Scratch that. If this phone comes out and it is even a penny
Forgot to
more
fill up my water
than that
after
year's
yesterday's
Pro
stream.
Max model, I will shave off every hair on my head. I will shave my head, and don't you think I won't. Since then, most publications now refer to this phone as the Air.
Yep.
And Mark Gurman, arguably the most consistent Apple leaker guy.
Ross Young is the most consistent leaker, but Bloomberg is the most consistent broad leaker when it comes to Apple. Ross Young is display focused.
Was typically very careful with his wording, is using the Air moniker. And I'm sorry, but I don't think Mark Gurman is calling it the Air because I did. Funny, wouldn't you say?
I mean,
back then,
I wouldn't underestimate FPT in that regard. They used to be a pretty notorious leaker back in the day.
we were certainly only speculating, but now I may or may not know some stuff. So let's show you the iPhone Air after the sponsor break. Apple always takes care of business numbers on the front page at the mentioned new iPhone model means death of an existing one. iPhone Plus, you are the weakest link. After all of the rumors and speculation, concepts and renders, here is what the iPhone Air actually looks like.
Yeah, so this is a design that I've actually doubted more, which is funny because we have had leaks for that longer camera bar or whatever, camera matrix on the Pro models for only a very short period of time. But for the Air, we've had this leak for a little bit. And for some reason, I doubted this one more than I doubted the Pro one. But I guess once the Pro came out, it kind of vibed with me because I'd kind of gotten used to this one. Now, I still have the problem that this camera design looks uneven. Now, there are some things, once again, where I could see it being solved, mainly by having a less bright camera ring, so the camera is just a way more subtle part of this design. Do I like that it's continuous across the board? No. But if it helps with tech, like still keeping a nice stereo front speaker, right? Because that's where it would be. Please, Apple, do this, right? I've said it, even if these new design changes give you a tiny bit more cubic millimeters, which in cubic millimeters actually being milliliters. But here on the Air, this actually becomes double and triply more important. So if it helps you put a nicer battery in here, not compromise too much on speakers, all that stuff, please do that. Mohammed Youssef joining the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot read what I presume to be Arabic. Maybe try wait, can I translate stuff actually? No, I cannot. Not right in the YouTube app.
I'll say at this stage in the year, designs are pretty much final for the entire.
This is why I've also said it in the past that this is the time where we will actually see more committed leaks and rumors come out. And one thing that I do dislike about this camera bar is now it does work actually a little bit better for single camera design, and that is that this is basically a half square and a half square connected by a rectangle, right? My preference would be a squircle, so where it actually meets the more squared off, of course, sides here. But then the problem actually is that because this is a small camera bar, right, for a single camera, it kind of has to hug the camera, and it kind of doesn't have enough parallel with the rest of the chassis. So I actually have to take it back, and they kind of did what I wanted on the Pro model, right, where it's basically a squircle connected. This is basically like two half squares connected. Why is the flash on the other side? Also, how's it comfortable to hold? Well, in terms of comfort to hold, no iPhone camera design has ever been built around comfort to hold. It has always been around managing internal space, making sure that some stuff aligns with the motherboard, some stuff doesn't get in the way of the processor, whatever, right? Now, why is the flash entirely on the other side? God knows. Maybe they figured out they needed whatever little bit of extra space they could here. My expectation is that this is the only way they could justify this elongated camera bar. They like this design and kind of maybe work backwards from saying, we kind of need to fill it. And maybe if we had like one camera right here, it would make sense to just spread all our camera components here. Now, one thing that I've talked about in the past is that the microphone and the LED flash are not actually super tall components. So depending on how thick that elevated camera bar is, there could actually be still basically all room you need for the chip and other components there that you would want to be cooled. So basically what this portion does is it gives you extra space on this side of the device. Rather, if you had that flash right here, then the camera bar would kind of have to end halfway through the body. So whatever Apple gains here from having a little bit more internal space, and they can advertise a new design language, that's kind of what I see happening here. Yeah, but you can put your hand around the previous ones. Wait, but where do you put your hand? That is my question. Like, I never put my hand there. What? No. If I hold my phone just in portrait mode, then in fact now it would be more comfortable because I could rest my finger underneath. Now I cannot rest my finger on top, but neither can I really do that with the current design. I guess if you put your finger right there, yeah. Like because you would currently have like the dual camera here and the LED flash here, so you could have your finger resting here, but that would just be for photo taking stuff, right? And you can hold like, you can even like hold your phone like the other way around if you wanted to. In landscape, one of my fingers is on the other side. Well, switch it around, I guess. Like at the danger of sounding like Steve Jobs, I guess if that will be your complaint with this model, I guess the counter would be you're holding it wrong. And again, this is just fun. I understand there will be some ergonomic repercussions here, but don't forget, nobody forces you to buy this model. And if you get the pros, you do also get the extra advantages of just the larger internal space, which to me do outweigh that specific scenario. Like, I don't even know, how do I hold my phone in landscape? Do I really rest so much of my fingers on the back? Maybe I should try it because you're like the second guy telling me this, Relay. So maybe I should.
entire iPhone lineup, so what I saw with my own eyes is what you see here in our recreated render. From what I understand, this is less of an upgraded premium iPhone and more so debuts as a side grade, a supplemental
I 100% agree with that.
Complementary option sitting next to the regular base model. This basically is a plus model, just with less of it, so a minus. If you saw our last episode, we showed off
like
what
this
we
design.
believe
Yeah, this is why, like, these leaks do line up for me now in my head. I can see what Apple is going for with that unified design in that regard. Kind of how if you look at the current dual camera design, yeah, it looks cleaner than the triple camera design, but you still get that elevated 3D glass around the dual camera. And you get the LED flash separate, but because the Pro models also have the LiDAR sensor, right? You still have that elevated 3D glass, but it's square rather than more of a rectangle, and you position the flash and the LiDAR around those. Designs that look pretty different once on a short glance, but designs that still share one foundation, and I can see that here too.
To be the iPhone 17 Pro design. You can watch that video next if you haven't seen it, but notice the camera bar on the top?
One thing that I do not like the way it looks here is that the camera looks kind of out of whack with the squircle design here. So this is actually the thing that I was just addressing, that the completely round camera bar around the single camera actually does solve, which this design does not.
Yeah, Apple is fully committing to this design language, it seems. Of course, not a language they invented. Google has been speaking it for a few years now.
Who cares? Like, I legitimately have to say, like, for the 17 Air, yeah, have absolutely no problem saying that, which is ironic because several Apple YouTubers, I believe front and foremost Drew from Tylos of Tech, have actually been asking Apple to copy that so it doesn't wiggle when you put it down. So I guess that's one thing that would be solved with this.
But who's keeping track? Current rumors are suggesting a single 48 megapixel camera on the back, and that's what we're seeing too. Well, we're seeing a single camera.
Yeah.
I'm unsure about how many mega.
I mean, we've had 48 megapixel cameras on the base models ever since the iPhone 15. It stands to reason that the 17 Air, especially if it still occupies like an $800-900 price point, will have a 48 megapixel camera.
Are in it. The camera bar on this puppy looks a lot more like a pixel camera bar, thanks to the only needing a single lens there thing, with the flash and mic being moved over to the right. And I'm just gonna give it to you straight, man.
Yeah. He means it looks a lot more than on the Pro models. I absolutely agree with that. The stream is acting up again. Oh, thank you, by the way, for letting me know. Going to OBS. I don't have any frame drops here. Weird. Maybe it's on your part? Looking at my iPad, it looks pretty smooth. You guys know how paranoid I can be about the tech stuff. I've had some internet issues today, but like I thought they had kind of fixed themselves. Like I just reset my router briefly. I don't know. I don't see any issue. The picture is fine, but the voice cuts off. Is it still happening? Well, I'll just briefly. Okay, now I just briefly turned off the mic and turned it on again. Hopefully that helps. Oh, Jesus Christ. Hopefully it all works tomorrow. Like, OBS is just a shit app. I'm sorry. It's really not what you would want. Like, and I looked into it because all pro apps that exist for streaming are basically just like more custom versions of OBS. I don't think I would escape any of the issues of using OBS right now. Let's continue. Let's see how it works for you guys.
That's a pretty iPhone. All right, it is what it is. In fact, I would like to start a movement to revert back to single lenses on phones. It's time. I get it. We needed to add more lenses in like 2015, 16, whatever, because sensors were smaller and we needed to compromise with additional dedicated lenses to pick up the slack. Well, it's 2025 now, okay? The sensors on the back of our phones are much, much more substantial at this stage and backed up by computational photography from every angle and now straight up AI. Okay, it's a cell phone. It's time. It's one lens. Let's go back to one lens, please.
I would easily take one lens if it had real optical zoom. That's unfortunately not going to happen anytime
And thank you.
soon.
We conveniently left this Air design out of our last video because, well, if you knew what we knew, you would have made 2 videos too.
One word comes out, 10 others are muted. Is it still happening that way? My iPad shows none of those issues. I have no, bro. You might try to like restart your YouTube. Maybe it's something with the way the live stream just comes out at your end.
So, there it is. Anyway, but now you can see another reason why a design like this on the Pro makes less sense. Apple is going to want their designs, even if they're kind of funny, to look intentional and consistent. The camera bar is up there nice and flush on the Air device, so it's got to be up there nice and flush at the top of the Pro.
By the way, one thing that I'm not getting, why did they make this pure black? And this they kept gray. Really great that it's working fine for you now. Sometimes that's YouTube live streaming stuff. I'm not sure. Like to me, the browser is actually way worse than the app. Like the app is more aggressive on like cutting back quality and stuff like that, but it keeps itself pretty smooth. If you're going through the browser, sometimes the app too, though, it just does weird shit to like audio and video alignment. You might skip like I also had like weird YouTube issues in general in recent times. So I don't know. Like I feel like YouTube is kind of getting overcrowded with just how much usage there is.
Pro 2. The front of this bad boy still has the normal, typical dynamic island, but it is hella thin. And you know I mean it, because I have never said hella in my life. I don't personally know the exact measurements. Rumors suggest something like 5 to 6 millimeters thin. Listen, I'm sure that the Pro model iPhones this year will be exciting and lovely, but there's something about this iPhone Air situation that is tickling my peenie, all right? I'm curious. I'm just going to say it. I am curious about this phone. I'm curious enough to buy it when it releases. I'm curious enough to make it my daily driver, or whatever you nerds like to call it. I will just call it my iPhone.
Okay.
This is Cyberpunk.
So we'll get to this one too. So I don't think there's anything shocking for me to comment in that regard anymore about the latest iPhone here, the rumors. I think that they now make sense for the iPhone Air as being basically a plus replacement. By the way, Jan, welcome to the stream. Have fun with your döner kebab. As every other country would say it, but because we live in Germany, guten Appetit mit deinem Döner, Mann. Jesus Christ, that was so stupid. Really, yes, I am streaming tomorrow. In fact, I have actually, as you have seen today and yesterday, for my time, I streamed at 5:30 p.m. So I usually finish up work around 4 p.m., 4:30, and can stream at 5:30 p.m. if the time allows it. Sometimes I work way longer, sometimes I'm way too tired. But the iPhone SE, I actually made sure that I only work basically before afternoon tomorrow. So by 2 p.m., I'm capable to stream. So whenever the iPhone SE realistically comes out, because given that it's California time, and California time is like, what, 7 hours ahead of me, there is pretty much no chance for me to miss out on it. So I am streaming tomorrow. Ideally, I would love to know the time where this happens so I could stream half an hour before it goes live, but I will be starting basically 15 minutes after the info is revealed. So hopefully that helps. So now that we have gotten that kind of out of the way, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, and hit that noti bell, because that notification will help you actually know when I'm actually going live. Yeah, so very briefly about the iPhone 17 Air. So, of course, websites like Mac Rumors, 95 Mac, they're talking about the design. What is, of course, also now coming up, and this briefly was mentioned by John Prosser at the end, is that the regular 17 is actually rumored to be getting the same design as the iPhone 16, which to me makes sense because the iPhone 16 was actually very positively received for its design language, for its more vibrant colors. And while I do assume that the 17 Air will match the latter, I'm not sure about what it will do with the former, right? Whether or not people will similarly positively react to that elongated camera bar. So, plus, of course, it's cheaper for Apple to just reuse certain components. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if the hardware of the camera is almost identical before we get a much more substantial upgrade for that with the regular 18 model, probably with like dual cameras inside an elongated camera bar. But we are getting one big new thing with the base iPhone 17 and the 17 Air. And I think this is going to be why Apple can get away with potentially not going too crazy on the camera tech on the base iPhones. And that is that the iPhone 17 and 17 Air will not just get LTPO panels, but in fact, they will be getting the M4 generation Samsung panels that Apple has thus far put in the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. Very nice, very bright screens, very efficient, supposedly better long jumps on chemistries. This is coming from Weibo leaker Instant Digital, who we have covered him in Digital Chat Station in the past. Both have a mixed track record, but decent enough to be covered here. Which, funny enough, actually, the current Galaxy S25 Ultra still is based on an M13 panel. This is why it's also one of the last flagships with an 8-bit panel. So while sure these devices they will be more competing with the upcoming Galaxy S26 devices, it's funny that for almost half a year they will have a panel technology superior to Samsung's flagship. So that's quite cool. Of course, those are LTPO panels. Those will not just allow for high refresh in the form of 120 hertz, but also variable refresh rate. I assume Apple will also give them always on displays with that. So very nice smoothness advantages for things like video playback by setting yourself up to 48 hertz when playing back 24 FPS videos, or setting yourself to 60 hertz when playing back 30 FPS videos, dynamically reacting to whatever refresh rate to whatever frame rate your the games hit. So especially if the A19 is a nice performance uplift, that will be a good reason to offer more hertz on a device that can render more frames. What is also interesting about part of this display rumor, and this is specifically coming from this Mac Rumors report because I didn't remember it. Now for the 17 Air, we have rumored of it being like a 6.6-inch display ever since we got the first leaks. Basically, it would be like 6.56 rounded up. Makes sense to me, right? I would prefer it to just be 6.7 so we don't have any developer work necessary, because in the past we had 6.5-inch screens, then 6.7-inch screens, then 6.9-inch screen. So they're getting the LTPO 3. I'm not sure if M14 is LTPO 2 or 3. It's weird because Apple uses LTPO 2, 3 differentiations only on the Apple Watch, not on the iPhone, but they are 1 hertz capable. Now, technically, so is LTPO 2. It's kind of it's more of a question about like the display controller that Apple pairs with LTPO 2, that they don't allow for actual 1 hertz refreshes like visually. Like for example, like the tick of a second of your for seconds on your clock, right? But the difference between LTPO 2 and LTPO 3 doesn't matter as much for the iPhone. It is basically the most up-to-date panel generation that you can get. That's pretty much what matters. If you define it as LTPO 3, then it's pretty much LTPO 3. Because the M13, for example, which is older, but even M13 it's not always the same thing. Like, I believe you can make M13, for example, into 10-bit panels, while Samsung still only uses 8-bit on the Galaxy S25 Ultra. So you can still kind of mix and match production processes. It's a little bit like how 3 nanometer, for example, exists as N3B, N3E, and N3P. And then you also even have like those FinFlex technologies where you can even make one part of the chip more dense than the other. And the same thing goes for display stuff. You can play with display density. You can play with the exact nature of the chemistry with to either prolong longevity or have higher brightness peaks and stuff like that. Or you optimize it more for just the smoothest variable refresh rate for the adaptive nature of the screen. So, and then it all depends kind of how the chip in the end will depend on the actual architecture of the chip. A display will then depend on the display controller that you pair it with. So yeah, there's a lot to look out for. BO was lacking, so Samsung better get those displays ready. Yeah, I think that if they are targeting M14, like honestly, that leaves BOE only the iPhone SE going forward, right? Because sure, I do expect BOE to at some point catch up to M14. Definitely not this year, and probably not enough in good supply next year. So my question at that point would be that basically leaves LTPS panels, so the less advanced technologies. And once Apple goes with like something like tandem OLED or whatever on the Pros, maybe BOE can catch up enough to give something okay for the base models. But yeah, there definitely is a big technological leap here, at least when it comes to mass production, like true mass production, like what you need to supply the iPhones. And by the way, I've been saying that for years. Sure, we can argue, oh, LTPO panels from Samsung, they are in enough supply to have been available on the iPhone 16, right? Or maybe even already the iPhone 15, right? Something like that. But I always try to explain to people, Apple really cannot play around with that shit. If Apple ends up selling 20% fewer iPhones simply because of display supply chains, or they have to kill their profit margins by 10-15% because suddenly Samsung is asking them double the price, that is just like, I know it's not going to happen with like mid-gen, but what if for the next generation, Samsung basically says, look, we are so big, we are so irreplaceable for you, we're going to go the double TSMC route. Like TSMC regularly changes prices simply because they are the market leader, but we are not going to change our prices by 10-15%. We're going to ask 30% more, right? And you can go with BOE if you want to, but that BOE device will now have on a newer device worse display tag than you had on your last gen product. So good luck marketing that, Apple. This is why Apple just cannot give those companies that kind of power over them. I wish Apple actually had more control over their display supply chain. And there are rumors that they are doing that, but especially like everything regarding micro LED seems to be working in a similar direction to how Apple made itself more independent, at least in chip design, right? Not necessarily semiconductor manufacturing from other companies. And Apple is working on that for their own modems. Again, TSMC or somebody else will have to manufacture their modems, but when it comes to the actual architecture, they do not want to be entirely reliant on Broadcom or Qualcomm anymore. Yeah, so that's about for the iPhone 17 Air design. The 17 non-design changes. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting. Obviously, if somebody was really looking forward to getting finally promotion on cheaper iPhones, this is the year you'll get it. In fact, this year you're actually getting meaningful upgrades across the board, because the iPhone SE, yeah, you might say, oh, what the hell is a 60 hertz OLED screen doing for me in 2025? Don't forget that is an above 1080p resolution display, so it's like 460 ppi. It's a 6.1 inch screen. It's OLED and it's full screen, versus what is currently a 4.7 inch slightly above 720p, 326 ppi screen on the iPhone SE 3 that is housed with like the home button and huge top and bottom bezels. So while you might think, oh, it's not something new like OLED and shit like that in 2025, but if you're just looking at the iPhone SE lineup, it's the biggest change ever. It's bigger than when Apple moved from 4 inches to 4.7 inches. Okay, but that's about it for the very direct Apple stuff, because there is something Apple adjacent that I would like to cover. Now, before we do that, let me quickly look into whether or not iOS 18.4 beta is finally launched, but it doesn't look like it has. I'm looking at it in every stream at this point. At this point, I assume it just is going to happen simultaneously tomorrow with the launch of the iPhone SE, which is quite crazy. But we do have something more to cover, and I know that we have a lot of chip nerds in this community, because I am one, and I loved covering everything from Apple's chips to whatever is the major competition across the board. And obviously, in Apple's world, SoCs, so system on chips, are the king. So this is where the CPU, the GPU, the neural engine are all connected, or they even sit on one die. Now, you can do either one. Usually being completely monolithic is better for efficiency, better for internal latency, but it can limit just how big you can make each individual part, because at some point you hit price limits, yield limits, even reticle size limits, because the denser your node, the smaller your maximum die size gets. And the biggest competitor in quite a while to Apple's SoCs is this new AMD Ryzen AI family. In fact, now we are adding Ryzen AI Max. And if we are talking about the highest end version, it's called AI Max Plus 395. It's all part of the Strix Halo chip family. And we'll have to see how it compares to Apple's M4 Pro and M4 Max chips. Now, it makes 0 sense to compare it to Apple's regular M4 chip. That's because the regular M4 is a very small die in comparison. It is crazy more efficient because of like how much smaller it is. But it also is therefore slower in a lot of ways. So the real competition here is M4 Pro, and I would argue M4 Max is way more of a realistic competitor, but because of Apple's proclivity to price their stuff pretty highly, Pro is more price competitive, Max is more performance like power level competitive. And by power level, I mean power consumption, because in terms of real performance, the Pro already gives it enough heat there. Really saying, yes, we are chip nerds. We are chip nerds and we are proud, guys. Jan Hendrik, you're thinking that the 18.4 beta could come around 7 p.m. our time? Yeah, that happens. I've seen it even launch as late as 8 p.m. German time. So I'm not saying that because it hasn't come out yet, it will not come out today, but it's just funny at this point. Sorry, I wanted to read your message in German. You'll be switching to the iPhone Air this year or Pro because your mom wants your 15 Pro Max. It's ironic. My mom also wants my 15 Pro Max, but I'm definitely going to the 17 Pro Max, not to the Air. So, the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, now it has one product that it's currently being reviewed in. It's this tablet laptop hybrid called Asus ROG Flow Z13 JZ, no, it's not JZ, Jesus Christ, GZ32, no, not 32, 302 EA. It's a convertible. Jesus Christ. And it's powered by the AMD Strix Halo Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 chip, or the Ryzen AI Max 390, which does have 2 less things to say. Jesus Christ, this is so crazy. So what is interesting, I'm not going to cover this device too much. I do have one review that we're going to watch for the Ryzen AI Max family. It's coming from Hardware Canucks, which they do focus more on laptops than the likes of Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed or even LTT. So they're usually pretty early with these kinds of reviews. The Dave 2D video for this is like 6 minutes long. I don't really care anymore. It's not that he is bad, but there's just not enough detail for me to care. So our analysis today is going to focus on the chip, and then at the very end of the video, we will also be getting some new data when it comes to its efficiency in an actual product. And the way we measure that is by measuring battery life. So I hope you'll enjoy it. As always, let me know your opinions and what else you might want to see cover in that regard. Obviously, I cannot react to more than this video today because after this I still have some things to do. But I'm actually very happy that this came out and I get to cover this. Without further ado, let's get started.
Running at almost 70 frames per second at 1200p, and this is me editing a 20-minute review in Resolve, and it took less than 10 minutes to.
So there are a few things that I will be commenting on because they do account for less with specific they are less a counter to specific results as they try to deal with the methodology here. Now, when it comes to wattage, I have a problem when people list TDP as the actual wattage that is being used for a task. I promise you that when it comes to just exporting a task, no Apple series processors will ever hit its maximum CPU power consumption. In fact, that 48 watt rating, because Apple does not give out TDP ratings, I promise you that, technically the highest one that, for example, Notebook Check has measured just for M4 Pro max power consumption is around 46 watts, but that's peak power consumption. Usually the highest it gets in a sustained way is around 40 watts. Now that is obviously for its 14 core design. This is 10 CPU, 10 performance cores, that's 4 efficiency cores. Technically, the M4 Max can give you like 55 watts. That's because it has 2 extra performance cores. So it is a 16-core CPU with 12 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. So whenever you see these power ratings, none of them, most of the time, sometimes they are measured, but most of the time they're just blind TDP repeats. They're not actually representative of the exact power consumption that the chip had during that workflow.
Export. I'm also running DeepSeek R1 within LM Studio, and
I don't like how, by the way, like, have some freaking pride. Like, don't get me wrong, DeepSeek is interesting, or DeepSeek, as we've called it here, or Seek. Right, SIKH, which if that was like the Indian version of DeepSeek, like why are you running this? Like, after all the problems that people have found with it, like I know that it's like open source and shit like that, or at least like there's a version of it that's open source, but like there's just run freaking Llama for all I care. Like, have some pride. You're Canadian. Sure, using US tech right now also is very insulting to Canadians. I fully understand that, but like don't use this Chinese crap. Like, it's already bad enough when Apple has to go to China and bend the knee to like Baidu and Alibaba and even companies like whoever made DeepSeek. I'm still pronouncing it wrong every single time. But like, yeah.
It's pretty fast to compute locally. All of this.
By the way, guys, if you are ever feeling like you're losing an argument, just do what I just did. Like,
done in a PC that's just 0.6 inches thin.
I love, just like, don't get me wrong, it is relatively thin for a powerful tablet, but this is almost 3 times thicker than the M4 iPad Pro.
And only weighs around 3.5 pounds.
And 3.5 pounds is 2.5 times thicker, heavier than the 13-inch iPad Pro with the M4 chip, which is 1.5 pounds.
almost the same size as a 13-inch.
It's almost the same size on the X and Y axis, definitely not on the Z axis.
iPad Pro. Yeah, this tiny machine packs some serious power. All of this is possible thanks to the new Ryzen AI Max processors that use a single chip with up to 32
So
threads.
that single chip in comparison to Apple's actual single chips is, this is partially why I opened this up, not just because I did. I am brilliant and I am prepared, guys. So this one consists of a GPU/IO die, and which is powered by RDNA 3.5. And it consists of up to 2 CPU dies. Most of them will have 2 CPU dies, especially the ones we are talking about today. But technically, you could also have only 1 if you are fine with having 8 CPU cores. So this is why you can have this as like 12 cores or 16 cores, right? You can have fully enabled 8-core dies, so you can have them slightly binned with like 6 cores each. When we're talking about the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, we're definitely talking about the fully enabled one. This has pretty decent bandwidth, up to 256 gigabits per second, which ironically it sits on a 256-bit bus, and it uses 8,000 megatransfers per second memory. Now, this makes it slower in terms of bandwidth than Apple's M4 Pro. The M4 Pro also uses a 256-bit wide bus, but it uses slightly faster 8500 megatransfers per second memory. So it's tiny bit faster. It's 270 versus 250. It's not that big of a difference. But then when we compare it to the M4 Max, the M4 Max has the faster memory of 8500, 8533 to be exact, and it has the super large bus of 512-bit. Technically, this would even allow it to have something like 256 gigabytes of RAM if they just use only the highest density modules available, but they don't. Both of these solutions max out at 128 gigabytes. The M4 Pro maxes out at 64 gigabytes inside the Mac Mini, and it maxes out at 48 gigabytes inside the M4 Pro MacBook Pro. So again, some things to consider, especially if you want to get something for AI workloads. What is important about this solution is that this allocates up to 3/4 of your overall memory to the GPU. So if you have 128 gigabytes, that leaves you with 96. If you have 64, that leaves you with 48. If you have 32, that leaves you with 24. Basic math, Apple does not have a hard cutoff. Technically, all the GPU, as long as you keep enough for the CPU when it comes to just like managing your system, so like 4 to 8 gigabytes, but basically all your GPU can go, basically all your RAM can go to the GPU on Apple. Which of course also means that all of it can go to your neural engine, which for AI workloads is really important. Now that still is monumental here for the Windows side, because previously in order to get the chip that can have 96 gigabytes of VRAM, you would have to get like an NVIDIA Quadro card, so something for the Pro segment, and pay like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000. And I believe that's just for the 64 gigabyte version. Now, and if you get go for like a consumer part, like the RTX 5090, that 600 watt GPU maxes out the 32 gigs of RAM. So while it is in theory way, way faster than this, it's also way, way more memory limited, unfortunately.
On the CPU side and a massive GPU. With that combination, AMD is hoping that
massive GPU, it's 40 compute units of RDNA 3.5, which is not bad, but it's not massive. Like, I mean, Apple has 40 GPU cores on the M4 Max. I have criticized them actually for not going up to something like 48. So for a more gaming-focused architecture, I kind of have to say 40 is not monumental.
They have a solution that can beat Apple's new M4 chips in creative workloads.
Nope. By the way, it does not, because the M4 Max exists. They will be testing only against the M4 Pro. I have no idea why, because across the board, the M4 Max is actually likely to use even less power than the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395. Obviously, the M4 Pro using way less than that. So yeah, funny comparisons, but I'll let it slide just to get the data.
While also delivering a good option for AI development and gamers as well. And although it was announced this year at CES, we're finally now allowed to actually talk about how this thing performs in all of those areas. I think there are tons of different applications where we could see the Ryzen AI Max series, or what's codenamed Strix Halo. So from ultra small form factor PCs to something like the ROG Flow Z13. The options are limitless, since it gives companies the ability to maximize CPU and, more importantly, graphics power without needing a discrete GPU. And a bit about the
Yeah,
Flow.
I mean, that's the main benefit, especially for a system like this. Don't forget, discrete GPU, regardless of its power consumption, right? It takes up more space. It also, regardless if you have a monolithic SoC or an SoC that consists of a few interconnected dies, it will still be have more latency and consume more power for that communication with the CPU than the SoC. Now, it will have other advantages, like having its own dedicated memory system that can utilize GDDR memory rather than something like LPDDR memory, which is way faster. For example, on 512 bits, Apple gets like what, 540 gigabits per second, while in comparison on a 512-bit bus using GDDR7, the RTX 5090 gets 1.8 terabit per second, right? Yeah, it's over 3 times faster.
Z13, because we have two of them over here, one with the Ryzen AI Max 395 and the other with the 390. Both have 32 gigabytes of memory, which is a bit unfortunate since...
Yeah, like they should be. It's not that 32 gigabytes is not enough. Obviously, we have just celebrated that the Mac Mini and the MacBook Air got like 16 gigabytes of memory. But when you heavily advertise it, like ship it with 48 or 64, it's just a little weird.
This platform can technically be configured with up to 120 gigabytes of LPDDR5X shared between the
That to me makes 0 sense on this product, but 64 still could work.
CPU and the GPU. But I would expect 120 gigabyte devices targeted towards AI devs rather than gamers like this thing does. Also, based on our testing, ASUS has configured it to run up to 70 watts, but that just scratches the surface of what Strix Halo can achieve, since AMD rates it to run anywhere between 45 watts to 125 watts. I mean, of course, we'd never see those high power specs in a tablet as small as the Z13 over here because of cooling limitations, but this also points towards the AI Max series being potentially a lot more powerful than you're about to see. And speaking of seeing, let's get into the benchmarks with quick overview
So
of
he
devices.
speaks very slowly. There's one thing that I would like to complain about, and that is the large difference in configurable. That's what the C. What's the C stand for? By the way, I found it out after the last stream. It's configurable TDP. 120 watts. Yeah, maybe for the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, but why in 7 health, to use Game of Thrones lingo, why would you ever configure a 390 to that degree, right? Like, I mean, it has 4 fewer CPU cores, it has 8 fewer GPU cores, it has lower maximum clock speeds. Just across the board, if you believe that this is a 120 watt chip, yeah, you can make this on a 120 watt chip with fewer cores, but realistically, you would make this more of a 100 watt chip. So the fact that this chip can even be configured that high, in my opinion, makes it way more necessary to test every device like very thoroughly, which is a bummer because like I don't want to watch reviews that are super device specific when I'm in the Windows ecosystem. I want to have like a general understanding. Oh, how fast is the chip? What kind of configuration of the chip do I need? And then for my specific product, I can look how good is its screen, how good are its speakers, how good is the keyboard and stuff like that. I don't want to watch like detailed benchmarking every time I look at another laptop. Unfortunately, it is necessary these days.
45 watts to 125 watts. I mean, of course, we'd never see those high power specs in a tablet as small as the Z13 over here because of cooling limitations, but this also points towards the AI Max series being potentially a lot more powerful than you're about to see. And speaking
But that to me is bad, actually.
of seeing,
because I don't really want more than like 80-watt SoCs in laptops either. Like some might say, well, but you can just use the extra thermal envelope and whatever to make the device like really quietly and whatever. Like, no, bitch, just give me a thinner, nicer product, right? If it's configured to be mostly run at 80 watts, don't give me the cooling for 100 watts and make me pay for it with money and a thicker, heavier product. Just give me cooling that is appropriate for 80 watts.
To the benchmarks with a quick overview of the devices we're using. So the Z13 is a pretty unique form factor. It isn't a tablet. It isn't a laptop.
I hate the usage of USB-A. Like I got my only ever USB-C hub, and it includes 2 USB-A ports. So I was like, you know what? I basically am getting them for free. But I needed an adapter for Ethernet. And also something that at that point I was like, might as well get something that also has HDMI because I might connect it to my iPad too. And my old USB-C to HDMI connector actually like broke. It was like a Satachi thing or no, was it a Sabrin thing or whatever? Like it never worked well and then it broke. That's neither here nor there. But like I just dislike when USB-A gets still included. That was the main point of the rant. Really saying, I want cooling for 200 watts when it gets crazy warm, you feel it lacking. But that's the point. I'm not asking for an 80-watt cooling solution that barely handles 80 watts. The reason, the problem is that at 120 watts, none of those devices have like 200-watt cooling, but it's like for an 120-watt chip. They get super hot, they get super loud. Like this specific product, like Linus tested it out during CES, and it ran like crazy with its fans when it was maximized. So unfortunately, you're just not getting that overkill when it comes to cooling. When I say give me 80 watts for an 80-watt product, realistically, I'm saying give me 100 watts, because 80 watts for you might mean like having, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 RPM fan speeds. But give me slightly more, but don't make the cooling solution 2 times thicker and heavier. That's what I'm saying, which that has been the mantra for gaming laptops, especially when you had like those, whether we're talking HX chips or just dedicated, or no, it was HK chips, right? For Intel, it was HK. For AMD, it's HX, right? And when you had like those super duper overkill Intel chips, I always felt like that these cooling solutions, like they were so badly made. They were just so like, oh, I'm giving you like a pound of copper in your product. And I'm like, thanks, now I cannot hold it up. What's the point of this? That's what I don't want. This is what I want SoCs to change. Now for Apple, I would actually like 20, 30% more cooling material or whatever, because right now Apple's cooling solutions are like this thick. But for Windows, where sometimes you already have like giant like copper everywhere and shit like that, I'm like, it's time to put in more efficient chips in there rather than like chips that consume more and more power, and then you give me even more cooling. I believe your name was Onichan, if I'm not mistaken. K3R RIG. I remember this ROG laptop doesn't have Thunderbolt port anymore. We call it ROG Fantasy X. Okay.
It's a bit of both. There's just a lot going on for it. So we're putting these chips against the older Z13 and a couple of thinner like gaming laptops. All of them have discrete GPUs, and finally, there's also the
Really, for Apple, I want to see a better GPU. I agree. I've seen some people ask for like a dedicated GPU or maybe just like having a multi-die solution. I just want, give me like 24 to 28 cores on the Pro chip. Give me 48 to like 56 cores on the Max. And because if you have more cores, you can also clock them a little lower. They will perform a little bit better on the performance per watt efficiency chart. And while sure, you will still need more power to handle like potentially a 30% improvement on maximum GPU performance, that increase might be linear or even below linear. So yeah, I absolutely agree, especially with now the way faster memory. And potentially there's even faster memory available. Like there is 25% faster memory if Apple wants to, going from 8500 to 10700 memory, right?
MacBook Pro with the M4 Pro chip. And those 32 and 24 threads of the AI Max series
Yeah, I agree, really. I agree.
gives them a serious edge over
So R23 meaningless. It's an outdated version of an artificial benchmark test for a 3D workload that most people run on the GPU anyway, but this is used as a CPU test. So we're going to skip R23, going to go right away to 2024. Again, don't look at the actual TDP ratings because yes, it's very likely that your maximum power consumption for the M4 Pro will be 46, 48, maybe even 50 watts in such a test, especially if we are looking at the multi-core test. But for most of the time, it will probably level out at around 38, 40 watts rather than that.
has the same
While in comparison, by the way, also one thing that I want to rant about, 70 watt TDP does not mean you're limited to 70 watts. Like, will you tell me that, do you think that the actual like binning between those chips is so good that you get this big power increase without like what, over 20% more performance, right, at the same power level? No, that's because TDP does not say anything about power consumption. It says about the cooling envelope necessary to provide a decent experience with the chip.
number of processing threads as the HX370.
And similar to this, by the way, the HX370 has, I believe, 16 GPU cores. So half as many as the 390, less than half as many as the 395. Do you actually think it consumed 80 watt in this test? No. And by the way, we're talking about GPU cores. The CPU cores don't match up here too. This is a 16 cores. This is 12 cores. Do you really think there would be zero difference here? Plus, this is 12 cores, but this is 4 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores. So,
and is running at 10 watts lower, it's actually faster. Now, that could be because the Ryzen AI series mixes the Zen 5C cores for efficiency, whereas
this is why the TDP here has absolutely no meaning.
the Max processors only use those big boy Zen 5 cores. Meanwhile, single-threaded operation has never really been the highlight of any Ryzen architecture. And
so, might I say, this is a completely old and non-optimized test. And now look at
Zen 5
Cinebench
did make some improvements. There is a
2024
statistical
for the M4 Pro. Because yes, this is to all the naysayers who were always saying like ARM chips cannot be as powerful as an x86 chip because they have a reduced instruction set. Yeah, bro, chill out.
tie with the HX370, which makes sense given those clock speeds we just talked about. As for real-world
one thing I am a little
marks
bit
a
disappointed
statistical
about
tie.
in this test, actually, I expected more noticeable gains over the 370, right? Because yeah, they do share the same P cores, which this one uses Zen 5 cores for its P cores, Zen 5C for its E cores. This one is only Zen 5 cores. So I kind of expected to at least have like one core clocked significantly higher than on the HX 370. Like, for one, you have a larger power envelope in general, but you also have like 16 cores here, of which one might clock just ridiculously fast, while here you have 4 cores, out of which one hopefully clocks pretty fast.
With the HX 370, which makes sense given those clock speeds we just talked about. As for real-world benchmarks, well, AMD promised an Apple M4 killer, and that.
So Blender, this is where obviously we're looking at, I think we're looking at GPU compute. I wouldn't honestly put it past them to make it a CPU compute test, but this is where the comparison to the M4 Pro stops making any sense, because when you look at the power consumption and things like that, it just makes sense to compare this to the M4 Max. The M4 Max is a 16-core CPU, right, versus a 16-core CPU here. In fact, the M4 Max actually has only 12 P cores and 4 E cores, while this is entirely made out of 16 P cores, if we consider them. This has 40 GPU cores. The M4 Pro maxes out at 20 GPU cores. So this comparison is meaningless, and there's a big reason why AMD really focused on M4 Pro comparisons. And I'm pretty sure they recommended YouTubers to test it against the M4 Pro. Their argument is probably like, I don't know, probably price related or something like that. But realistically, if we just look chip versus chip, the M4 Max is a way better like direct competitor to the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 than the M4 Pro.
That's what the Max Plus 395 does. But we also have to remember, the Flow Z13 is chugging back about 20 watts more.
No, you have actually no idea how much more power it uses. Now here they're using no GPU acceleration. Here we are looking at the M4 Pro having 2 fewer cores than this, and actually a lot fewer P cores. So I would actually love to see the exact power consumption difference, not this TDP bullshit. This is where I feel like I question sometimes if YouTubers even know tech. I'm like, really? After all these years, you still haven't gotten the memo that TDP does not reflect actual power consumption? The best chip here to prove this is actually not Apple and not AMD. It's the Ryzen. It's the Intel Core i9 3900H. Now, this is not the HK or whatever, but it's still a very highly clocked chip. This one will probably very often hit 100 watts, right? Because that TDP range, that is just very device specific. It will absolutely peak significantly higher than 68 watts. By the way, what the F is a 68 watt TDP? You didn't want to give us exactly 70 watts or a nice 69? What the F is 68 watts?
Pro here. Basically, the 395 and 390 end up bracketing the M4 Pro chip while also being faster than the other processors here. There's also an interesting side story developing that shows just how much better the Z13 is than the Intel-based one from just 2 years ago.
So Handbrake is technically optimized for Apple. Yeah, I'm not even sure how. Like, I don't think for MP4 and MKV conversion it utilizes any accelerator. So this is just raw CPU power. Again, we're looking at 10P plus 4 E cores versus 12P cores versus 16P cores here. So those are actually pretty good results. Results where I would really, really love to see actual power consumption numbers, not the TDP garbage.
I mean, it's on another planet in terms of multi-core performance. Moving on to more creator-focused workloads, and this is one area where the optimizations.
This is single core, very much dependent, both Premiere, but Premiere has at least GPU acceleration. So basically, Adobe Suite loves single core performance, and Photoshop is just a beast on Apple Silicon.
Apple's hardware and operating systems start really flexing. Native apps are just so fast on the M4 series, and it's just hard to recommend anything else.
Yep.
And yet, the Ryzen AI Max series are by far the fastest Windows mobile processors.
And by the way, Apple could even like boost those numbers too. They are hitting certain bottlenecks even at these numbers, where if they were using like PCIe 5.0 storage, like instead of 7 gigabits per second, they were going with like 14 gigabits per second storage, or even 10 or something like that, they could probably cut down a few seconds even without having a faster CPU. But this is also why I always found like the whining about like Apple's single core performance so funny when people were saying, oh, 4,000 points in Geekbench, that's meaningless. But then you see like actual like scaling that works exactly with that 4,000 number, and I'm like, so what exactly was your expertise to complain about this?
we've ever tested here. And that proves that more than Intel or Qualcomm, it's AMD that has a chance to catch up with and beat what Apple's offering.
I mean, yeah, but realistically, you still end up using 50% more time. So I'm not saying that, like, and this is coming out months after Apple. So while I'm not saying that AMD has no chance, there is a chance, for example, that AMD might skip 3 nanometer and jump straight away to 2 nanometer. Plus Zen 5 is legitimately like their least exciting generational uplift that we have seen in a while. So if they actually like really go all out with Zen 6, maybe they'll get closer. But like I feel like it's really understating just how far ahead Apple is here.
Right. Now, you might think that we gave the AI Max chips an unfair advantage by running them at a higher wattage than the M4 Pro in the last test. Basically, we wanted to see how all these systems would perform at their maximum performance level. But what happens when we align the 395 and 390 with the M4 Pro while they're running at around 50 watts? Well, the AI Max Plus 395 goes from beating the M4.
So again, this is the 48 watt is entirely guess game, right? It is objectively like the max power consumption you can hit for CPU only tasks on the M4 Pro. Is it hitting that in all of those tests? I'm not sure. And then I'm really asking, did you really test like Resolve Studio and Blender without GPU acceleration? Why would be my question. So yeah, again, Apple is mostly better here when you account for the power consumption. Again, I could argue until I'm red and blue in the face that the M4 Max is the more reasonable competitor here. In fact, it's very likely that the 390 uses more power than the M4 Pro, and then the 395 uses significantly more. So yeah, however you want to see it.
Pro in multi-threaded apps like Blender, Houdini, and Handbrake, to very narrowly losing to it. Meanwhile, in apps like Photoshop, Resolve, and Lightroom, the M4 Pro pulls even further ahead, with the only exception being Premiere. Running the
Premiere is like, it's this weird thing where it like just the rest of Adobe's apps, it likes single core performance, but then it really likes GPU as well. Sometimes not even fully accounting just how much better potentially the encoders and decoders might be on the chip. So yeah, I'm not even sure what kind of acceleration they were using here. This is very shoddy methodology where I would love to just like have the details explained even once maybe, or like, is there like, do they provide some kind of like spreadsheet or whatever? No, they don't. Like, this is so weird to me.
390 at 50 watts also takes some wind out of it.
By the way, guys, I'm not saying that out of a feeling that Apple should have like some efficiency advantage. This is, in my opinion, the best cross-platform comparison site. Notebook Check. They compare Apple. They compare the rest. Look at this. This is Cinebench 2024. Again, I don't care about Cinebench R23. I care not so much about Geekbench either, to be honest, on Windows, but we can look at that at least. But look at the single core performance, right? So you have this advantage. So let's look at the Ryzen AI Max. Jesus, can I zoom out at least a little bit? Yeah. So where's the right? So 116 points actually lines up pretty well with their results. I believe Apple's results here are even a little bit faster. So you have 50% faster single core performance. So even if you account for any like optimization disadvantages, because this might be early drivers or whatever, that is a huge insurmountable lead. And it gets way more embarrassing when you consider like that's coming out months after. Now, some of you might say, well, what about the advantage of this being a 3 nanometer chip versus this being a 4 nanometer chip? Well, that would bring us to efficiency. efficiency. And when you look at the M4 Pro and even the M4 Max, let's even say on average they are 9 points per watt, right? We are looking at 1.1, we are looking at 2.6 points per watt. So we're looking at 3 times worse efficiency, right? This is plus 200%. So I'm just trying to say that, like, the reason why I find like they're focused on TDP, it's kind of like the Darth Vader quote, right? Like, I find your lack of faith disturbing, right? I find your amount of faith in TDP as a rating really, really disturbing. So then there's Cinebench Multicore. So this is where obviously the desktop 16-core chips win out versus Apple. This makes sense. This is a 24-core chip with 8 performance and 16 efficiency cores. This is a 16 P-core chip. So the M4 Max being so freaking close is already amazing. The Ryzen AI Max, also not bad. I mean, it's basically an underclocked version of this chip. So this chip being 37% faster, it's not too shocking. But it is still underperforming. And then when you look at multi-core efficiency, right, this is where nothing gets even close except for the Snapdragon X Elite. Now, the Snapdragon X Elite, notably also here being a way smaller chip. So, yeah, it's the devil is really in the detail. And by the way, when it comes to like the advantage that I talk about, 3 nanometer versus 4 nanometer, for one, it's not as big of an advantage versus N4P, and I believe this is N4P, not just simple N4, but it's definitely not that big. It's not 50% higher. So, in fact, that's even more than that. Well, about like, yeah, I mean, 7.35 plus this, yeah, pretty much lines up. It's 50% more efficient. That is not the efficiency advantage that you simply get from going from N4P to N3E. Not even close. It wouldn't probably even cover half of that most of the time, more like 20% of it. Yeah, and for 3D Mark for GPU tests, because the review that we are going to finish is not going to include too much data on that. That's actually wait, that's not the test I wanted to look at. So Wildlife Extreme Unlimited. I just wanted to show this off because I do believe this one is quite funny, because this one scales a lot based on the memory bandwidth. Now, that won't make the M4 Max twice as fast, even though it has 2 times the bandwidth of the Ryzen AI Max plus 395, but because it has the same amount of compute units, like it simply cannot get 2 times faster. But then you actually look at something like the MacBook Pro with 20 GPU cores, and you'll find that it has almost the same amount of memory bandwidth as the Ryzen AI Max Plus, and therefore it has almost the exact amount of performance despite having half as many compute units. So yeah, this is just funny to me. Oh wait, no, I think it showed me some improper scaling. No, it actually does scale almost linearly with memory bandwidth. That's crazy. I read this as 51%. I think my eyes were like blended by just how bright I pushed my screen. No, this is a 91% uplift. This is almost perfect scaling. This is insane. So whenever I say I don't like 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Unlimited tests because they basically only scale with memory, and that's just not how modern games work, that's what I'm talking about. Still Nomad Lite, that's what I prefer. So this is where this makes far, far more sense to me. So it is 25% faster than the M4 Pro. Makes sense. It has a similar bandwidth, but way more GPU cores. And it's the M4 Max is around 50% faster, which again makes sense. It has a similar amount of GPU cores, but more than double the memory. So the advantages kind of even themselves out. Really, really, this is why I'm saying, like, if you are going to look at 3D Mark tests, please, the only one that's even remotely relevant these days is still Nomad. And yes, for like, unfortunately for iOS we get, and macOS we only get still Nomad Lite, but hopefully we'll also get like the full version. GFX Bench, entirely uninteresting to me. Like, you can see Apple wins. Oh, big whoop. These are outdated tests. Sorry, bless me. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, this is why I'm trying to tell you, I'm not an Apple fan. If I see benchmarks that make no sense, but Apple wins them, I will disregard them too. So never think that because I'm covering a specific benchmark, I'm doing so to benefit Apple. That's just not the case. GPU OpenCL, this is actually where this chip comes back with a little bit of a vengeance. This is pretty meaningless. For one, this is OpenCL. Apple obviously should be tested with Metal. Plus, the GPU tests here are more like compute tests rather than actual graphics tests. So yeah, the only test here that is even remotely really useful for real-world gaming will be still Nomad Lite. And then for other gaming performance, unfortunately, we often have to deal with the fact that Mac simply doesn't have all the games that we can benchmark on Windows. Now, I do believe they sometimes let stuff run in an emulator, and then they even compare like the efficiency. But yeah, that obviously is not non-native tests. There are a reason why I didn't like use old Cinebench tests for Apple when they still had to be run through Rosetta. But let's continue with the actual video.
Sales, but again, from an apples to apples perspective, AMD might
Guys, we have quite a few people watching. I just wanted to remind you, I will be streaming tomorrow. Whenever the iPhone SE4 launches, I'll actually come on right away, maybe like half an hour after the official announcement or something like that. And while you're watching right now, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Let me know your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. You guys know I love interacting with a lively live chat. If you want to support this channel directly, you can leave a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube or support you over on Patreon. So all support is very much appreciated.
not quite have caught up to Apple Silicon yet, especially in areas where macOS optimizations come into play. But the gap is getting narrower than it's ever been. In the past, Windows-based portables needed ultra power-hungry CPUs and discrete GPUs to reach this kind of performance. But here we are, with a single chip that can pull something like this off. Now, we can't forget that one of the main disadvantages of many Windows-based laptops is how their performance literally falls off a cliff when they're asked to do anything other than light tasks when they're running on battery. So starting with a full-core workload in Handbrake, and some interesting things happen. First of all, the MacBook actually gets faster, while CPUs based on older
Yeah, so that is in the margin of error. I mean, it would be cool if it got faster when not connected to power, but usually it doesn't.
designs like the 8945HS and the 3900H see their performance tanked.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Zen 5-based AI and AI Max CPUs still need longer to complete the test, but the impact of running on battery isn't anywhere near as drastic.
Yeah, but this is still like, by today's standards, we're looking at like 2, maybe even 3 generations of upgrades in between here. Right, if something is almost 2 times faster and we get like generational leaps of 20-25%, stack that up. 1.2 times 1.2 is 1.44 times that times 1.2, you're about like somewhere in the 1.75-ish range. So that is pretty much the difference you see here.
Meanwhile, in Cinebench, every processor sees its performance fall off a cliff, except the HX370 and the M4 Pro. Now, this
Yeah, but I mean, like,
could be due to the fact the processor sees its performance fall off a cliff.
Like, there's still a difference, right? The M4 Pro did not drop at all, and while the HX370 dropped only a little, it also came from a much, much lower result. But this does come from the fact that the HX370 realistically is actually AMD's M4 Pro competitor. If it had 256-bit bus or even 192-bit, it would have been really worth like building it more up. But instead, this one has 16 GPU cores. It has 12 CPU cores, with a lot of them being Zen 5C cores, so they are more efficiency rather than performance cores. So if they had gone like I don't know, like 6P cores maybe. Maybe even like 6P cores plus 6E cores, so the same overall core count, and maybe like 24 GPU cores, and then a larger memory bus. I honestly don't know if they would need this many different like configurations. Like I think it would be a far nicer actually mobile chip, because it wouldn't, as they are showing here, fall off the cliff the second you disconnect it from power.
Except the
Because this is ridiculous, by the way. This is a device that's built with wait, is the 70 watts here the TDP, or is it the uh no, that's the TDP. I thought for a second, could it be the battery capacity? No, battery capacity is watt hours, plus the M4 Pro has a 72 watt hour battery. Not, I got, because like you have a device that has a large battery, like this one is powered by a 70 watt hour GPU. It has the large 70 watt TDP envelope. Like, what exactly makes it drop below the level of the HX370? This is just weird engineering.
HX370 and the M4 Pro. Now, this could be due to the fact that,
like, because we could be arguing, oh, let's say this was actually a tablet more akin to the M4. Let's say it was to the M4 iPad Pro. Let's even say it was like 2 times thicker and 50% heavier than the M4 iPad Pro, because right now it's 3 times thicker and it's 2.5 times heavier, whatever, right? But let's say it was still substantially more, but still relatively compact. Then I would kind of understand it, at least in this specific product. But like dropping below this is so weird.
Cinebench is a heavier workload than Handbrake. And the Ryzen AI Max series cuts its power pretty drastically here, whereas some others just don't. In a lighter threaded app like Photoshop, performance retention is pretty good right across the board, with the only real exception.
Yeah, and you can see, by the way, it's not like Apple is entirely perfect at maintaining absolute peak performance on battery. There will be 10, maybe even a 15% loss. I mean, in theory, yes, you can put it in high power mode, which, by the way, in high power mode, this is how it would get 48 watts sustained rather than 40. So I'm not sure. They did not say that that is part of their methodology, but and then there, even with like a TDP range of 70 watts, you can still configure those devices not just to a hard power consumption limit, but you can even like just have like more balanced or performance focused presets. So, oh man, I just wish they gave us more detail in how their testing works.
To that being the Intel processor, nothing just gets destroyed. So what we have over here is a multi-threaded powerhouse in an ultra mobile tablet style form factor. And while AMD has had 16-core 32-thread processors in high-end laptops for about 2 years now, what makes this one different is its integrated GPU. Simply put, it's huge, and to put its size into perspective, the current integrated graphics crown was held by the Radeon 890M.
No, it was held by the M4 Max. And realistically, it's still being held by it, but I guess you kind of have to, I don't know, like rationalize it away somehow from the discussion.
Inside the
But also, this is why I've been saying that the comparison to discrete GPUs, the 7800M is not a super fast GPU by modern standards. It has 50% more compute units. It clocks slower, but that's primarily from its use of RDNA 3 rather than 3.5.
HX370. It uses the RDNA 3.5 architecture with 16 compute units running at up to 2.9 GHz. The AI Max series, on the other hand, uses the same architecture and runs around the same speed, but the Radeon 8060S in the AI Max Plus 395 has 40 compute units, while the 8050S has 32. Now, on paper, at least, that puts it somewhere between the performance of an AMD RX 7600M XT and 7800M discrete laptop GPU. And for creators...
well, there are still some differences, like the memory bandwidth, because I believe these chips have 256-bit byte buses, but they utilize proper GDDR6 memory. So that should give them like what? What should it give them? Like if the 512 is 1.8, 256 bit 900, so it would be like 700. No. The PlayStation 5 Pro is like what, 540 ish. No, it's 570. So these would be 650 if they run 20 gigabits per second memory. So I actually have to 7800 XT. What or was it? No, that's the GPU one. That's the desktop one. Jesus Christ.
RX 7600 XT
7800M. I'm sorry. 7800M specs. GPU database. So it's a 192-bit bus. That's interesting. Which gives it a maximum of 432 gigabytes per second. That's interesting. That's still way faster than what you get on the SoC, but a little bit less than I honestly expected. Man, that the PS5 Pro would just decimate this, and I'm saying that because I have a PS5 Pro. Yeah. Do we even have that many mobile solutions right above it? Like dedicated mobile things? Like I guess the 4070, the 4070 Ti Super would be like a 4080 mobile or something like that. So there's obviously a way to get way faster mobile GPUs, but then they also come with significantly higher power consumption. I mean, this one already is quite crazy at up to 180 watts, but you probably would never configure it that high. And the other GPU is the 7600M XT. Okay, let's see how that compares. I can actually maybe find it right here. 7800M. 76. That's the 7600 XT. That's the desktop part. So the 7600M. Okay, maybe I skipped it. 7600M XT. So that one comes with 128-bit bus, actually bandwidth comparable to what we get on that SoC. I believe this is a 6 nanometer part. Yeah, so this one is not very efficient at all. If we compare that to the 7800M, this is a mix of 5 and 6 nanometers. So it's a main die of 5 nanometer, and then I believe the I/O dies, the memory controllers, are 6 nanometers, as far as I know. But it's all getting mixed up a little bit.
7800M discrete laptop GPU. And for creators, that means a huge amount of potential on tap. But there was also a bit of a problem with the way ASUS set up both the flows at 13's week got. You see, one of the AI Max's benefits, or its biggest benefits, is that it can dynamically partition up to 3/4 of its system memory for the GPU. That means in a 32 gigabyte system like the ones that we have over here, you could reserve 24 gigabytes for graphics workloads or AI processing, while the 128 gigabyte versions get up to an insane 96 gigabytes. Now, there are two ways to go about this. One of them is to let AMD's auto detection do its job, since it can technically self-detect the optimal amount of memory for a job. The other option is to manually set GPU memory in the BIOS or in Adrenalin's variable graphics memory settings. The problem is that for some ridiculous reason, ASUS isn't shipping the Z13 set to auto. Actually, out of the box, this thing is set to run with just 4 gigabytes of VRAM. And it's effective.
Yeah, so this is where like driver optimization goes obviously a long way, but also just teaching the OEMs of what your chip is actually designed to do is a big thing. So I weep honestly for the Windows users who get a product with like decent specs, but like its default configuration is so far away from the optimum way you would configure it, but they don't know it. And they just end up with an experience that is worse than what they paid for. And quite honestly, the fact that it has like a set memory amount is not bad, right? Maybe you just really don't want the GPU to eat up memory, that maybe your workload is more CPU depending, but there's something GPU happening in the background. So you just set the GPU to use like 8 gigabytes, and 24 of it will still be used for your CPU. Or maybe in rare scenarios, you would just set it the other way around, right? I just want every single megabyte available. But realistically, you always want it set to auto to automatic. I'm still not sure why exactly there's even this hard limit of 3/4. Like, don't get me wrong, it makes sense for like the 32 gigabyte configuration, because you could say, oh, 8 gigabytes, that one is needed for the CPU. Because of how demanding Windows 11 is at this point and stuff like that, just for the communication overhead. Sure, and maybe it can grow to 16 gigabytes on like the 128 gigabyte version. But really, you're telling me you need 32 gigabytes of CPU memory on the 128 gigabyte config just because it's 3/4? Like, what do you do once you have a potentially, like at some point, a 256 gigabyte configuration? Do you have to give up 64 gigabytes of that simply because of, oh, that's how mathematics work, and that's 3/4?
Performance is just
Or it's
insane.
1/4.
In Resolve, we see a huge benefit from just moving from ASUS's out-of-the-box setting to AMD's Auto, which dedicates 8 gigabytes to this project. However, at 16 gigabytes and 24 gigabytes, the CPU starts getting starved for resources. And
Yeah, that's also something, by the way, that I've heard, is that it gives memory in chunks rather than very dynamically just say, oh, GPU, you want that memory? Do it. Well, the automatic setting on SoCs very often will, because it's not as fully unified memory as it is on Apple, like it will just say, use this, here are like 4 gigs more, here are 8 gigs more, right? Rather than saying, oh, you need 32, here, get it.
rendering times start going upwards. Premiere saw the same thing with 4 gigabytes, just destroying system performance, but this time, 16 gigabytes for both the CPU and GPU seems to be the sweet spot. Gaming, on the other hand, also showed that...
But again, you shouldn't need a sweet spot. You should just have a system that automatically manages that. And yeah, when it comes to gaming, 4 gigabytes is obviously not enough. And then you have weird things like it crashed with more memory. So that's probably why they have like this weird default setting at 4 gigabytes. Oh, Jesus Christ. Like, this is why the Windows ecosystem is never what I want. Baldur's Gate 3 not being limited by 4 gigs of memory at 1600p in highest detail settings. I wonder what the 1% lows are here. Like, if maybe we're looking at a difference of like 16 FPS 1% lows, and here you get like 30, 40 FPS 1% lows. Because this is a RAM demanding game. This is weird. So Rainbow Six Siege, yeah, not super demanding game, but still a noticeable down. Like Starfield not getting lower performance with 4 gigs of RAM is honestly very surprising to me too. So these results are a little bit weird. For 1600p at highest detail settings, I honestly would have expected for more games to need more memory usage.
CPU seems to do best with 8 gigabytes of dedicated memory, and going beyond that ended up with basically no benefit. As a matter of fact, there were a few games like Red Dead Redemption that either refused to run or saw frame rate regressions. Meanwhile, manually setting 8 gigabytes seemed to do better than letting AMD software set to auto mode. Now, we're guessing that
this sounds like a nightmare to manage in the real world.
This is due to immature drivers. So things are bound to improve in the future, but for comparison purposes...
By the way, this is something that I have mentioned. The CPU community seems way more willing to adapt. Oh, a software update will fix bad things during the review period in the future than the Apple community. Like, I know it's often said about smartphones, like buy your smartphone for what it can do right now rather than what it can do with software updates. Usually that is said because, like, you know, iPhones will get like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of software updates. With Android, yeah, the flagships might give you 7 years, but even right now with what we see with One UI 7 and the super prolonged beta testing period that only happens right now on the S24, so you don't even know when your S23, 22, 21 will get it at all. But like, at least there is this attitude, like with mobile tech, with desktops and laptops, like these people very often say like, oh, it will be fixed later on. And sure, there's a kernel of truth in that, but I'm just like, really? Like, that's what you're telling to consumers? that sounds like you're excusing a lot of shit from these companies.
Manually setting our systems, or both of our systems, to set aside 8 gigabytes for the integrated Radeon 8000S GPUs. So in areas where GPU acceleration gets factored into the equation, like in Handbrake, the AI Max series can be very, very, very fast, easily beating systems with an RTX 4060, 4070, and even Apple's M4 Pro in Handbrake. And yet, systems with an RTX 4060.
Yeah, Handbrake. Like, nobody uses freaking Handbrake on macOS, so I couldn't even begin to tell you if that's a problem with like GPU core count, because this one obviously has the fewest GPUs here, GPU cores, or if it just refuses to use the accelerator or whatever. Yeah, like Handbrake on Mac is pretty much useless. Max Maximus saying hello from the gym. Man, I really don't think I'll be able to go to the gym, but I'll have to wrap it up in the next 30 minutes so I still can get some shit done today.
4070, and even Apple's M4 Pro in
Man,
Handbrake.
he talks
and yet,
really slow.
It can't pull off miracles every single time, especially against systems with discrete GPUs. I mean, it puts in
that's pretty insane. The M4 Pro beating an RTX 4070 system is a very substantial result.
Showing results that are close to what an HX 370 can get when it's paired with an RTX 4060 laptop GPU, but that can't compete with the Apple alternatives, nor with something like an RTX 4070. That's hammered home in Premiere Pro against systems with discrete GPUs. But even the M4 Pro struggles here. So in my books, what AMD...
Yeah, but that's just just a reminder to not use Premiere Pro on Mac, and that's not even like a new thing, right? I never like whenever a piece of software like gets like better on one system but not so much on the other, I'm like, okay, yeah, optimization sometimes happens in waves and whatever, but Adobe Premiere has basically never been as well optimized as something like Photoshop on macOS, because Apple gave up on Aperture. Apple stopped making a professional photo editing app, but Final Cut kept on going. This is why Premiere Pro never got the same love on Mac that even relatively it got on Windows. Not that it's a very loved solution there either.
accomplished here with integrated graphics is almost unbelievably impressive. They've essentially designed
and again, this is also where the M4 Max should be your actual comparison point, because now you're comparing it with systems that have an SoC that consumes about as much power as the M4 Pro, plus a dedicated GPU that also has like its own set of power consumption.
Chip, CPU, and graphics solution that can almost match an RTX 4060. That's impressive. Now, the gaming results back this up too, with the AI Max 390 coming close to matching. And it's
Baldur's Gate, by the way, would have been an opportunity to test the Mac, and you can use the metal overlay to actually get some good results, like to get some good results monitoring. So while I know that Baldur's Gate has like some software issues on Mac, I at least would have seen some, would have liked to see some results. And yeah, like good, what I assume to be 1% lows, right?
Cases even narrowly beating the HX 370, RTX 4060 systems in many games. Meanwhile, the 395 really puts on an impressive show by actually managing to beat a laptop that's sporting an RTX 4070 running at 70 watts. It's really hard to describe how crazy this thing is. That discrete card in the laptop is running at 70 watts, which is actually as much as the same amount of power as the entire AI Max chip that can consume on these systems, CPU and GPU combined. Even the AI Max 390 puts down some incredible numbers in that respect, even at a native 1600p resolution. Now, both systems are also able to outperform the last Intel-based Z13 with its 51 RTX 4060.
Yeah, but like you're testing it now against very weird things like the 3900H. It's really not a very relevant comparison. Not that it's completely worthless, but it's like, who cares?
Pretty wide margin in most situations. You'll probably also notice that the only device that we don't have here is the MacBook Pro, and that's for two reasons. First of all, most games here just don't natively run on Apple hardware, though some do, and also we just don't have a reliable way to capture frame rates in macOS, at least
and there
not
are
yet.
Games that you realistically could, like even a smaller game like Stray, for example, like it is a graphically nice game, right? You could test it. It's native on Mac, it's native on Windows, it's even exists on consoles. So yeah, like obviously Starfield is not on macOS. I'm not claiming that that should be your comparison point, but it's just, yeah, like you can do that. By the way, like weird things happening here on this specific system with the 1% lows. Like this system seems to be very unbalanced, and it underperforms a 4060, because to me having 50% higher 1% lows is way more important than having 10% lower 10% higher averages. So weird things happening.
But we're working on it. Now, there's obviously some areas where AMD needs to massage their drivers a bit, or there's some CPU limitations going on behind the scenes. CS2 is proof of that, because it looks like NVIDIA's GPUs might have some optimizations that are lacking in RDNA 3, but hopefully as time goes on, the Radeon team can get things rolling. Okay, so that establishes the Ryzen AI 9 Max series as something special on the GPU performance side. But there is one more stop, and that's AI workloads. Something a lot of systems using these chips will be targeting.
Okay,
I mean, look, AMD has
I'll
slapped AI
speed
into
up
these
through
products,
this
so
even more.
we have to talk about it. And just a quick note, not one of these tools would run on AMD's integrated XDNA-based NPUs, so we're solely focusing on how well these workloads
This is also where we're looking at optimization problems, unfortunately.
are accelerated through the graphics subsystem.
Jesus,
One of the main
how
issues
slow
we
is he
have is
speaking
that
that
most
at
programs don't recognize the
1.35? It
GPU
still
right now,
sounds
because it's so new, so we
relatively
expect
normal.
any results you see to improve in the future, especially as AMD's ROCm gets rolled out broadly. I should also point out that we set the Ryzen AI Max systems to reserve 24 gigabytes of memory for the GPU in these tests. So let's start off with an 8B and 14B models running through the Backyard AI interface. Since the 8B model is relatively light and easily runs on all the systems with the discrete
Okay,
NVIDIA
yeah, respect for using Llama and Quen.
GPUs taking the lead, the M4 Pro puts in a pretty good showing too, even though that this program isn't optimized for
And again, the M4 Pro here, severely under powered in terms of GPU cores. Even funnier that considering that the M4 Max is likely using less power than any of those solutions, rather, except for, well, the HX 370 is paired with a 4060, so it probably uses less power than that too.
for this app. Meanwhile, the AI Max series does pretty good here as well by offering performance that's almost as good as the 70-watt 4070 and 4060, while also being able to beat the power-starved RTX 4060 in the 2023 Flow Z13. But when you hit these systems with a larger 14B model that doesn't fit completely within the smaller memory footprint of the discrete GPU,
I wonder what they used. This is probably the 48 gigabyte system on the M4 Pro.
and the ability to
Because
set
they
aside
said it's
24
the 16-inch MacBook Pro, so it cannot have 64 gigabytes like the M4 Pro Mac Mini.
gigabytes on the AI Max really comes in clutch. They can even edge out the M4 Pro. In LN Studio, we've decided to use DeepSeek R1 with 8B and 14B models. Due to AMD's optimizations, they're a lot more competitive against the RTX 4070 and 4060 in the smaller model, and just walk away with things at 14B. But nothing, and I mean nothing, can touch Apple here, since they're seeing the benefits of a program running through their native MLX AI framework. Just to give you an idea, you'd need to be running a desktop RTX 4070 to beat these numbers. Unfortunately, synthetic AI tests like UL Procyon have a long list of issues when it comes to supporting and optimizing for new architectures. And
yeah, this has been a benchmark that has been used by many YouTubers for a while. It just went out of date in many ways.
we see that here. Both the AI Max chips get relatively good numbers in Stable Diffusion 1.5, but they underperform when running Stable Diffusion
I mean,
XL.
like for
And
cross-platform
Apple-
tests, like you can still use it for like Windows to Windows tests, but obviously, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, UL still hasn't rolled out proper support for the M4 series chips. The interface benchmark doesn't help matters either, since AMD GPUs need to run through Windows ML here rather than under their own native framework. So their numbers are all messed up, and no, there isn't support for Apple Silicon here either. Honestly, until UL can turn things around somehow as we continue to build out more AI testing in the future, expect us to phase out this benchmark entirely. So the last thing that I want to cover here is battery life.
And this is honestly the reason why I'm still staying here.
I'll be perfectly honest. It's a bit difficult to evaluate how efficient AMD's AI Max is on battery. That's because the only device we have is the Z13, a quasi-tablet with a relatively small 70 watt-hour battery.
70 watt hours is not small. It's the exact same battery size as the M14, as the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Yes, technically that one is 72 watts, but like, come on. Just the difference in display size would make more than up for that.
Hopefully, we get a bit better perspective as some actual laptops roll out with it. And even with the smaller battery, you know what? I was expecting a bit more from the Max series, especially when you consider that, other than the 2023 version, it has the smallest screen here. I mean, sure, 9 hours is good, but it should be a lot better. Playing back...
So, and it's also depending on how you use it. So this is web browsing. So this would not really benefit from something like Apple's mini LED stuff, where like one part of the screen could legit stay black. You have like 50% longer battery life than like the Ryzen AI 9 HX 370 with like, what would that be? 100 divided by 73. the battery on my iPad is running low. So that's a 37% improvement on battery life. That's a 37% improvement in capacity with an over 50% improvement in battery life. So it's definitely more efficient, and it does so while powering a way larger screen here. So yeah, definitely a more efficient system. But yeah, these results for the for SoCs are like, it being worse honestly than the HX370 makes sense, because that's a monolithic die with fewer cores, and I mean, so is the 8945HS. That's basically just a predecessor to it. But the fact that despite all the like architectural efficiency gains, it cannot really match that is very weird. The art all the way, AATW, I think I'll call you AATW, saying, I really like your content so much. Lots of love from India, lots of love back to India. I know I have plenty of people watching from India, usually timeline related. It so happens that most people watching from India watch after the stream, just because like it's later in India, and if I stream at 6, 7, 8 p.m. for you guys, that's like midnight or beyond. So always great to hear from people who are coming from all over the world to join the chat.
Local video doesn't make it look any better either, but at least it's...
Yeah, this is like, again, now we are looking at, and again, we said 37% larger battery with way over 2x the battery life and a larger screen. So the efficiency advantages of macOS and Apple Silicon here are just mind-boggling. And you would honestly need the Snapdragon X Elite here to have a system that even breaks the midway point.
Far better.
And yeah, but again, like, these differences are not actually too crazy. Both of these chips are 4 nanometer. Yes, this one especially is based on an older architecture, but like the difference between Zen 4 and Zen 5 and between RDNA 3 and RDNA 3.5, they're not so huge. So these differences, they kind of make sense to me.
Than the previous version, which only came with a 56 watt
Now,
battery.
I would still expect them to maybe outperform these devices on like well-optimized laptops, maybe with like 80 watt-hour battery lives, 80 watt-hour battery capacities, but I wouldn't expect them to come anywhere close to the MacBook.
And actually, capacity plays a big role here, since it's why the MacBook does so well. It has a massive 99.6 watt battery.
Yeah, I also watch after live, but today I was not feeling sleepy, so I decided to catch a live only. Well, I highly recommend you, because I like catching people like you live. Leave a comment also afterwards, because this is one thing where the channel really struggles. We get decent views afterwards, like 1 to 3K views, like over 2 or 3 days once the video processes, but almost nobody comments. Right? That's really bad for the algorithm. So I highly recommend, if you watch the video afterwards, or even if you watched it live but you check it out afterwards, please consider leaving a regular comment, just a hi or you liked it, because that really will help us attract more people in general, but also potentially more people from like where you're from, right? Because then the algorithm knows, oh, people from India like it, I should show it more to people in India. Like, that's how we got a few more German viewers recently. Like, even a few of my friends commenting on a few videos helped, and then we got a few more general German viewers, and yeah, stuff like that. Sure, I'll comment. Thank you, ATW. Thank you for watching. I'll just try informing you guys why that YouTube shit is so important. Tomorrow we'll have a lot more viewers, believe me. So I'm just trying to like amp you up to be the most the greatest MarkTech channel warriors you can be.
That's almost 50% bigger than anything else here. Personally though, I'm hoping that AMD can tweak things a bit, because there's no way...
I loved how just long that bar kept extending. Again, over 2 times the battery life on 37% higher battery capacity with a way larger screen. This is a very nice result. And again, the 25% differences between like a way larger SoC, a multi-die SoC versus smaller monolithic SoCs, and plus no efficiency cores versus the HX 370.
APUs like the Max series should be getting beaten in battery life testing by two systems with discrete GPUs like the Zephyrus G14.
Oh yeah, right. Those do have discrete GPUs, but I believe I believe a good modern system should be able to just turn it off, right? Like, because they do have their own integrated GPUs, media encoders, they do not need to rely on their 4060s and 4070s.
And the tough A14. The interesting thing is when you hit these two CPUs with a heavier workload while on battery, they surge to the front and get the best battery life.
Yeah, so this is bullshit because this is just maxing out power consumption and then letting the battery drain. This has absolutely no reflection of like the actual power consumption per result, right? Like, it really doesn't matter. Like, in theory, the M4 Pro can also consume way more power by making its screen brighter. But that's not going to be a balanced test. And if you're just letting this chip perform potentially 2 times higher in Cinebench, because don't forget, this is on battery to drain the battery. And we have seen the disparity between the Mac retaining basically all of its top performance versus this one dropping by like 60-70% at this point, which will make the Mac 2 times faster. That's still way better efficiency.
And 90 minutes on battery isn't a lot, but at least it'll let you get a project finished and rendered out in a pinch. And that MacBook...
But again, a project like... this is a Cinebench, what I assume to be a CPU result, which, yes, you can kind of make some statements about what else it means, but at that point, you probably are more interested in seeing sustained GPU battery, like sustained battery life under GPU I'm sorry, my brain is fried at this point. You're probably are more interested in battery life under a sustained GPU load rather than under sustained CPU load, because you probably want the system more for gaming. AI workloads are more benefited by GPU acceleration. You run Blender most likely on and other 3D workloads on the GPU rather than the CPU. I cannot even think what Photoshop is largely single core dependent, so it will not have that small of a battery life. Premiere Pro has obviously GPU acceleration. It uses encoders and decoders. The same goes for DaVinci Resolve. So I'm not even sure what task would that be. Like, even coding, like, you're not talking about continuous code export, code compilation. When you're just typing in your code and maybe like checking the system every half hour or so, that's also not this. So I'm not even sure what this test represents.
I mean, it does gobble up its 99.6 watt hours, and I guess that's a sacrifice Apple's chosen to make in order to maintain the M4 Pro's performance when it's not plugged in. So what AMD has done here is something very special.
So this is now a little bit too butt-kissery, quite honestly, for me, because looking at all the other results, like I already showed you, the notebook check stuff, I do believe it's relatively special for the Windows ecosystem, but I do not believe it's anywhere close to special when compared to even like Apple's M3 generation. Now, that is not to downplay it entirely. It's obviously good that we get more comparable, more competitive SoCs on the Windows side, but with some of the driver issues, with some of the inefficiencies that we see versus monolithic SoCs, with some of the bandwidth limitations that we see versus like Apple's actual high-end 40 GPU core solution, it's not as great as I had hoped it would be. Now, beating out the 4070 laptop in some scenarios, or at least matching it, right, that's what you can see here. That's definitely not bad. When you look here, the 8060S, 6700 MXT, 4070 laptop, so 10% difference here and there. That's absolutely acceptable and good results. But don't forget, these systems will not be super duper cheap either. So if they don't really bring too much of a battery life improvement, that's a little bit concerning. But let's hope, as they said, that will be figured out in drivers and things like that. And even optimizations from game developers and stuff like that. For coding and programming, which PC should I go for? It depends on what you need. Honestly, for every coder that I know uses Macs because they also have like they need to make something for iOS, and obviously Xcode only exists on Mac OS, so they kind of don't have a choice. But also like the efficiency of the CPUs on Apple Silicon, even going back to like M2 and M1, is still not something you can really match with Zen 4, Zen 5, the latest Intel systems. Maybe that can at least match the M1 and M2 because that one is at least on 3 nanometer. But for your specific use case, you might need programs that don't exist on Mac OS. And in that case, I just, like, if you need it, for example, for college, for like a programming course or something like that, ask them what apps you need. If you need it for work, then very likely they might give you a device to work on, or they might subsidize the purchase for you. So ask them what you need. And if they say a Mac is fine, then make them subsidize a Mac or something like that. But yeah, I cannot give you like a flat out answer. It's the same thing as even with like video editing. Yes, for a lot of regular video editing, I would just by default say Mac. For one, Final Cut Pro is, in my opinion, still the best. DaVinci Resolve is the best optimized for Mac. It's still good on Windows, don't get me wrong. But the efficiency advantages of running those apps on Mac are just huge in comparison to any existing Windows system. However, if your video editing also involves you doing a lot of 3D stuff, maybe like rendering your own projects, because you're doing like very complicated, I don't know, transitions, you're making like almost small cartoons for the videos you're creating, then Windows might be the answer if, for example, Blender is not enough for you. If you're using like some of the 3D programs, 3D editing, 3D work programs that simply don't exist on Mac or haven't been optimized for Apple Silicon ever. So yeah, I always try to not be like, oh, you should never consider Windows or you should never consider Android, especially Windows versus Mac. I highly, highly encourage Mac over Windows, even more than I encourage iOS over Android. But I do understand that there are hard limitations. And if you are somebody who needs absolutely like bonkers hardware, especially since Apple still hasn't updated like the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro, then you might have no choice but to go with Windows. And if you're doing like want to game on the side, then yeah, I would recommend probably like a 5080 system, even though I hate the 5080 as a GPU because it only has like 16 gigs of memory and it's a $1,000 GPU at MSRP that gets sold for $1,300. But I would recommend it over a Mac because, well, the Mac simply won't do the same gaming. Yeah, you're welcome, ATW. So, guys, that's about it for today. We actually covered quite a bit. Let me quickly see if maybe iOS 18.4 made a surprising reveal. Seems like it actually didn't, which is insane. So, seems like my prediction that we might see it tomorrow alongside the iPhone SE is going to be correct. Now, there's still a chance that it might launch in 12 minutes at 8 p.m., but at that point, I'll be on the toilet and freshening myself up to actually still get some stuff done today. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you so much for commenting lively in the chat, for liking, sharing, all the YouTube jazz. Again, a small reminder, we'll be streaming tomorrow, pretty much regardless of when the iPhone SE4 launches. Yeah, so bring all your enthusiasm there. Epidemic Sound Plus, can you send me any of the Apple product for free, like Mac, iPhone, and iPad? No, but you can send me one for review. Like I myself use an M1 Max MacBook Pro. I use an M1 iPad Pro. I use an iPhone 15 Pro Max. I use an Apple Watch Ultra 2. So I don't always go for the latest and greatest. My finances would probably allow me to do that if I always sold my older stuff, but I also like to just give my older stuff to then, like, usually my mom or my grandma or my cousin, because then I know those products are still in good hands. They need updates too after 2 or 3 years. So yeah, if you want to send me hardware, that would be definitely appreciated. So I'll see you guys tomorrow then. Hopefully we'll also have to have iOS 18.4 to discuss, rather than quote unquote only the iPhone SE4. Will also be interesting if Apple maybe gives us some promotional video alongside the iPhone SE4. Yeah, so plenty of things coming up. On Thursday, as I said, I am going away for a family and friends trip, but I might actually still be able to stream right before I go away. My train is in the late evening, so but I'll let you know. And as always, if you subscribe and hit the notification bell, you'll actually have an easy way of knowing when I'm about to go live. Thank you guys so much. I'll catch you tomorrow. As always, let me know what else you would like to see me cover next, and don't forget to leave that comment afterwards. Thank you so much. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.